Four students, including an Indian student, sued the Donald Trump administration for what they alleged was the unlawful termination of their student immigration status, which leaves them at the risk of possible deportation. Now, Chinmay Deore, an Indian student studying in the United States, along with three other foreign students, have filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration. Now, this comes amid the government's immigration crackdown. The students who are studying at the Michigan public universities took their legal route after their immigration status was allegedly terminated unlawfully. The US government, meanwhile, has said last month that it was only acting against people who are counter to the national interest, such as students with criminal records and others who participated in protests against Israel. However, many students have said that they haven't committed any deplorable offenses. My colleague Vishal Vivek joins us live for more on this. Vishal, what's the latest you're picking up? And also, will this case can this case rather act as a watershed moment for hundreds and thousands of more international students in the US currently?
Well, Arjun, each and every day new cases like these are emerging. This is the latest in a flashpoint that has started ever since Trump walked into the White House for the second time. And he promised an immigration crackdown, and he seems to be carrying that out quite often. And these students, they have reacted to that and they have filed a lawsuit, a big lawsuit. And these are four students belonging to India, Nepal and China. And they have said in the lawsuit that they have no criminal record whatsoever. All they have are few parking tickets or speeding tickets. So that cannot be a ground for them to be deported. As the emails have suggested that they could be deported. And these emails themselves have not really originated from the Department of Homeland Security. These emails have been passed to them through the organizations where they have been studying. So why the DHS has not contacted them directly, that is also one interesting angle. And also the fact that these students have been there for a while now. The Indian student there, he's been studying in there for about 4 years now, and he lived there for a total of about 15 years. So why such an action has been taken against him, and why there is a risk of deportation, that needs to be answered by the authorities. So far the authorities, as you mentioned, have been telling that they are cracking down against people who participated in a lot of these protests against Israel and also have some criminal records. But these students who have filed the lawsuit do not fall under that category. So that raises a lot of questions on the methods used by the DHS and the US administration. So these questions will have to be answered, and also the fact that many students are in a state of shock as to these emails have been landing on their email addresses at a random rate, and they don't know really what is happening.
That's absolutely right. A lot of questions, in fact, need to be answered, and more so by the Department of Homeland Security. Thank you so much for getting us the latest there, Vishal. Moving on, but staying with the US, after freezing critical funding for Harvard University, the Trump administration has now warned that America's wealthiest education institution may lose its power to enroll foreign students. Now this, if it does not bow down and accept the Trump administration's demand to curb the so-called anti-Semitism on campus. The Trump administration has further reportedly also formally approached the Internal Revenue Service, or the IRS, asking it to revoke the tax-exempt status of the Ivy League college, citing its alleged failure, that's right, citing its alleged failure to address the issue of hostility against Jewish people on the campus or anti-Semitism. Meanwhile, recently US President Donald Trump has also aggressively targeted prestigious universities that were the center of bitter protests, as you all have seen, sparked by Israel's war against militant group Hamas in Gaza, stripping their federal funds and directing immigration officials to in fact deport foreign student demonstrators, including those also who hold valid green cards. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff, President Donald Trump's special envoy to West Asia, will hold talks with European allies in Paris today on U.S. efforts to negotiate a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. The U.S. State Department has said that Rubio and Witkoff would be in the French capital Thursday for these meetings. The officials will have talks with European counterparts to advance President Trump's goal to end the Russia-Ukraine war and stop the bloodshed. Now, Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce said this in a statement Wednesday. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni on Thursday will become the first European leader to meet US President Donald Trump since the White House imposed sweeping tariffs, reciprocal tariffs on virtually all of its trading partners. Over in Asia, Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived in Cambodia on Thursday for a two-day state visit that also serves as an opportunity to further strengthen already robust relations. Now, the visit, Xi's first since 2016, will conclude a three-nation Southeast Asian tour that included stops in Vietnam as well as Malaysia. Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet recently described Beijing as an important and indispensable friend of Cambodia that has in fact helped support the country's economic and social development as well. On the ground, she was greeted at the airport in Cambodia's capital Phnom Penh by King Norodom Sihamoni. On the other hand, China has said that US tariff hikes no longer make economic sense. The World Trade Organization sharply cut its forecast for global merchandise trade from solid growth to a decline, in fact, on Wednesday, underlining further US tariffs and spillover effects could lead to the heaviest slump since the height of the COVID pandemic. Not only this, the WTO said it expected trade in goods to fall by 0.2% this year, down from its expectation in October of 3% expansion. It said its new estimate was based on measures in place at the start of this week. Listen in to the Federal Reserve Chair's remarks. Meanwhile, moving on, US stocks fell sharply on Wednesday, hit by a double blow from Nvidia's China-related warning and the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell's caution over the economic impact of these tariffs. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell warned that President Donald Trump's tariffs are unprecedented in modern history, with effects that, quote-unquote, remain highly volatile.
The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth. Both survey and market-based measures of near-term inflation expectations have moved up significantly, with survey participants pointing to tariffs. Survey measures of longer-term inflation expectations, for the most part, appear to remain well anchored as well.
US President Donald Trump recently expressed optimism about the potential for tariffs to generate substantial revenue, possibly even replacing income tax. Yes, that's correct. In a conversation with Fox, Trump in fact highlighted the significant financial gains from tariffs, drawing parallels, or rather even drawing parallels with the late 19th century when the US imposed tariffs and amassed considerable funds. There's a chance that the money is so great that it could replace income tax, Trump stated, referencing the period between 1870 and 1913 when tariffs were the primary source of revenue for Washington. Now, during this era, the US experienced unprecedented wealth, with Trump noting, and that's when our nation was relatively the richest. We were the richest. However, Trump also acknowledged that any changes to the income tax would require congressional approval, as the legislative body oversees all tax policy. And the American dream seems to be fading for Indian nationals as heightened H-1B visa rules, a 38% drop in student visa issuances, and of course 20 to 30-year green card delays have shattered hopes. Now, with AI screenings, consular delays, and shrinking job prospects, Indian students and even professionals are turning to Canada and Germany, leaving US universities and even tech hubs like the Silicon Valley, reeling from a loss of talent and also billions and billions more in revenue. Is the great American dream over? My colleague Vishnu Shom gets you the special report.
There are stricter F1 visa rules for students, with a 38% drop in issuance in 2024, which discourages Indian students from applying to US universities because of approval uncertainties. There are stricter H-1B policies, including higher fees and a 38.6% drop in the 2025 lottery registrations, making it tougher for Indian nationals to secure visas. What do you mean by lottery, you may ask? Well, because India has gone above its country quota, there are a large number of nationals who, for a limited number of births, get through a lottery system, which is unfair at one level, but that's the way it is. It's all tougher for Indian nationals to secure visas, reducing their chances and deterring US study and work plans. There are waits for green cards as well, sometimes decades. That makes the US education system less appealing. It pushes Indian students who want to go to America, get an education, get a job, and then ultimately move to an H-1B if they are sponsored by a company, and ultimately a green card. But if that entire process is difficult, it progressively pushes Indian nationals to go to countries like Germany and Australia. A few years ago, we would have said Canada, but that appears to be changing as well. Visa revocations for minor infractions affect over 300 Indian students. They create fear, leading some to defer or cancel US university applications. There are new AI social media checks unfairly cancel visas for Indian nationals. Many say that it's unfair, and that creates a fear and uncertainty. There's also a reduced optional practical training or OPT opportunity, which lowers postgraduate job prospects and causes a 28% drop in US-bound Indian admissions. There's a high US tuition cost combined with visa and green card uncertainties, which make alternative destinations like Australia perhaps more attractive for Indian students.
US Vice President J.D. Vance will pay an official visit to India from the 21st to the 24th of April. He'll be accompanied by Second Lady Usha Vance, their children, and senior members of the Trump 2.0 administration. Now, this will be Vance's first visit to India. He will meet PM Modi on the 21st of April. The Vice President and his delegation will have other engagements in Delhi as well, and are also, in fact, scheduled to visit Jaipur and Agra. My colleague Mohammad Ghazali gets you the latest on this.
President J.D. Vance and his wife Usha Vance, the Second Lady of the United States, are expected to visit India next week. The press release came from the White House that how this visit is expected, as J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, will first visit Italy and then India. The dates are from April 18th to April 24th. And in the first leg of this visit, J.D. Vance will be visiting Italy and will meet the Italian Prime Minister there. When it comes to India, he's expected to meet Prime Minister Modi. Prime Minister Modi is also slated to move to visit Saudi Arabia on April 22nd. So it is being sort of arranged that before departing for Saudi Arabia, the Prime Minister will meet Vice President J.D. Vance, who will be here with his wife and Second Lady Usha Vance. Usha Vance's parents are of Indian origin. So this trip is largely professional as well as personal, both for the Vice President of the United States. Now, when it comes to topics and the discussions which he will be having with the Prime Minister, it is expected that talks will revolve around the bilateral trade agreement, which is still in the progress between India and US. And also, this visit comes at a time when President Trump has put a pause, a 19-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs. So, bilateral trade agreement, reciprocal tariffs are going to be the key issues which will come up for discussion when J.D. Vance meets Prime Minister Modi next week.
Canada's PM and Liberal leader Mark Carney and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre had their first direct public exchange on the election campaign, debating who would best represent the country as Prime Minister amid historic trade tensions with the US and also strong concern over the rising cost of living. Now, public opinion polls show an increasingly polarized political landscape in which a two-party race has emerged between the Liberals and the Conservatives, leaving Jagmeet Singh's NDP and Bloc Québécois trading their typical levels of support and at risk, in fact, of losing a significant number of seats in the next parliament. The country has approved a landmark global pandemic treaty after 3 years of talks and without the US participation. Despite the growing sense of urgency over how to respond to pandemics, 5 years after the COVID-19 outbreak killed millions and devastated the global economy, nations stumbled over negotiations about technology sharing. During COVID, rich nations were in fact accused of hoarding vaccines and tests to the detriment of poorer ones. Now, experts said that while the treaty wasn't perfect, it was still a definitive moment in the history of global health. However, All's not good because concerns still remain over America's decision to impose tariffs on pharmaceuticals and even reduce global health funding. The UK's highest court on Wednesday ruled that transgender women cannot be legally defined as women in a case that could have widespread ramifications for equality protections. All UK organisations will now have legal backing to restrict single-sex areas like bathrooms and changing rooms. A trans woman and former UK judge warned the ruling could be, in fact, a kicking-off point for more overt restrictions on trans rights, while a columnist for the Conservative Spectator hailed the decision as a victory for women. Now, this judgment was the culmination of a contentious culture war debate, in fact, that has divided the UK as well as the US, where President Donald Trump has signed, in fact, a slate of executive orders targeting trans people. The US has issued new trade sanctions targeting Chinese importers of Iranian oil. Meanwhile, Iran is dangerously close to developing an atomic weapon. Now, the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA, has warned of this barely hours before the UN watchdog's chief was expected to leave for Tehran. A blackout hit nearly all of Puerto Rico on Wednesday as the U.S. territory prepared to celebrate the Holy Week, and hotels were almost at capacity. More than 1 million customers were in the dark and out of a total 1.4 million clients, according to Luma Energy, which oversees, in fact, the transmission and distribution of power in the American territory. It was not immediately clear what caused the shutdown, the latest in a string of major blackouts on the islands in recent years. Meanwhile, Governor Jennifer Gonzalez, who was traveling, said officials were working diligently to address the outage. By late Wednesday afternoon, some 5,000 to 7,000 clients had their power restored, although that number is expected to still fluctuate. The fire destroyed over 50 houses in a camp of displaced people in Sudan's western region of Darfur, an aid group said on Thursday. Now, footage on your screens that was captured by the General Coordination for Displaced Persons and Refugees in Darfur showed the fire that happened Tuesday in the Mukchar camp. There was no report of casualties, and it wasn't clear what caused the fire that worsened, in fact, the living situation of the displaced people. For perspective, more than 300 civilians were killed in just 2 days of intense fighting in Sudan's conflict-racked region, the UN Humanitarian Agency reported Monday this week. Now, this as the African country's brutal civil war nears the 2-year mark. Meanwhile, Russia has announced that its forces had gained control of a settlement in eastern Ukraine, while Ukraine reported pushing back multiple Russian attacks as well. The Russian Defense Ministry said in a daily briefing that its forces had in fact taken control of the settlement of Kalinovo in the Donetsk region. Russian forces also carried out strikes on Ukrainian military airfield and assembly site of unmanned surface boats, ammunition production facility, and also a repair plant of armored vehicles, said the Russian Foreign Ministry.